And welcome back to the Survive Scale Soar podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy. Just a quick reminder, this show comes in two formats. One is real talk, just me and the mic sharing with you over 20 years of business experience. And then there's success talks, where I get to interview people at the top of their profession, and they share with you their vision, their journey, how they got there, their successes and their failures. And you're going to be able to take those lessons and be able to apply them in your life. And I've got a great guest today. We have Brian Walker, Justice Brian Walker of the Texas Second District Court of Appeals. He's going to be joining us on the call today. Brian, welcome.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me, Jeremy. Good
I,
to
am
be here.
excited about this. A little bit different than what I normally do. A lot of times it's, business owners, real estate agents. I've had some authors on, but to have a justice on here, this is going to be pretty special. You and I go back a little ways, back to the
Yeah,
days of Texas State. We got to talk about that a little bit and remember how old we've gotten. So
yeah,
uh, I'm excited about this today. Brian, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
yeah, sure. So I guess, as you mentioned, that my formal title is Justice Brian Walker. Uh, so, at the court, our employees call us judge. It's really an interchangeable term. The formal term is justice, but oftentimes we just go by judge. So I'm Brian Walker, Judge Brian Walker, whatever you want to call me. I don't really care about the title. But I serve at the second highest level in the Texas judiciary. Our court system is kind of broken down into three levels. When the most recent constitution in Texas was written and ratified back in the 1800s, actually the latter 1800s, after Reconstruction, they modeled the federal constitution and the judiciary piece, and that's why we have kind of a parallel to the federal courts. We have our district courts, and we have thousands of trial courts at the first level throughout all 254 counties in Texas. If you include, I say thousands, if you include the county courts at law and justice of the peace courts and things like that, we probably have thousands. But we have almost, I think, 500 district courts, which is our bigger trial courts at that first level. And then at the second level, you have 14 courts of appeals that have regional jurisdiction. There's a new 15th Court of Appeals that was created just in the past couple of years, and it has statewide jurisdiction. It only handles uh, types of cases that are business cases, like corporate litigation, or in lawsuits involving the state of Texas as a party. So it's still pretty new. And then, of course, at the top level, we're unique in Texas in that we have two Supreme Courts in Texas. We have a bifurcated Supreme Court level. Uh, there's only one other state out of 50 states that does the same. It's Oklahoma. They modeled our Constitution. And so we have a Supreme Court that does civil cases, and we have a Supreme Court that does criminal cases. One's called the Supreme Court, the other's called the Court of Criminal Appeals. And they have the highest level. And the reason I mention any of that is because it helps to kind of understand what I do. We, at the second Court of Appeals, we're the second one created in Texas. That's why we're called the second. We're up in North Texas. We have 12 counties in our district, which doesn't necessarily sound like a lot when you have a state of 254 counties, but we also have some of the most populated counties in the state of Texas. In fact, we have about 8.1, 8.2 million people in DFW today. It's pretty massive. And about half of that is in my district. And so, we actually have a population in our district that's bigger than the state of Oklahoma and several of the other states that surround us. So it's a pretty large population pool, which means for the seven judges on our court, we stay pretty busy. Out of the 14 courts of appeals, the original 14 courts of appeals that have been around now for at least, I think the 14th, which is in Houston, was created about 30, 40 years ago. So we've had 14 courts of appeals for a long time. So this whole 15th thing is new. It's kind of hard for me to even remember that it's there. But out of all of us, there's 83 judges altogether who serve at the intermediate level, second highest level, whatever you want to call it. And so you have 83 Court of Appeals judges serving 31 million Texans. And so it's
A lot.
significant. Yeah, it's a lot. And so we do appellate cases at all types. Anything that gets appealed from a trial court in Texas, one of the district courts or the county courts at law, that come to us. under any kind of matter, civil, family, breach of contract, real estate, criminal, child, protection cases, child removal cases, any case you can think of, we handle the appeals for those. We have a you have an automatic right of appeal to the intermediate courts of appeals, unlike the Supreme Court level where you have to actually file a petition to ask them to take your case. We have to hear it, and we hear everything except for one thing. There's only one thing we don't handle, and that's death penalty cases. They actually skip us when they're appealed automatically, and they go to the very top, the Supreme Criminal Court, which is called the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which just by happenstance my father serves on. So him and his 8 colleagues, they have to handle all those cases um, and all the supreme, highest jurisdictional criminal matters to get appealed to the very top. So that's generally that's what I do. It's not who I am. I'm a believer. So my identity is not in what I do. My identity is in Christ. And so I'm a man of faith. It's very important to me. And
So
more important than
how
what
did that shape your faith in Christ? How did that shape where you are now? How did it get you there?
I would say significantly. I mean, it's not just, a part of my faith is also just trusting God to guide me and direct me. And there's no question that He has done so, and that He's gotten me to where I am and what I do today. There's a Proverbs 16:9 says, "A man chooses his path, but the Lord directs his steps." And it's a verse that's beautiful, and we overlook it sometimes, but it's seemingly saying, at least for my interpretation, that even though we're exercising free will and we're making a plan for ourselves, and maybe even when we walk out in the street today and go our own way, that simultaneous to us acting in that free will, God's also guiding us. And so it's part of His providence, and so He takes us places where He wants us to be when He wants us to get there. And I've experienced that in ways that just there's I've had many occasions where He's taken me someplace that I never anticipated going, and it was done in such a way to where there was no explanation other than God did this. And it definitely was a big piece. In fact, when I ran for my position, I did it because of a God thing. I was kind of at the end of my ropes. I practiced law for 17 years, and I had done, two law offices, one in rural Central Texas, one up here in the Metroplex, and I was getting kind of burnt out and disillusioned with what I was doing, and I just really felt like I needed to change. And one day I was sitting in my office in the Fort Worth Stockyards. Kind of cool, actually. You look out one window and I'd see the Exchange Avenue and the Cattle Drive, and you look out the other window and you can see the skyline off in the distance in downtown Fort Worth. And I prayed that morning and I said, God, I really feel like there's something different that you want me to do. I really believe it. And I believe it's over there for some reason. And I pointed my kind of looking at downtown. And I said, but I don't even know what it is. You're just going to have to walk me into it literally. And I said, but I'm begging you for a change. It's time for a change. I know it's time for a change. And 30 minutes later, I walk into the federal courthouse for a hearing. It was really hot out of summertime, so my MO would typically be I'd carry my tie. Obviously, you can see here, I'm not a big tie guy, which is kind of funny for somebody who's practiced law for 17 years and sits on the court now. But I carry my tie into the lawyer's lounge. Most courthouses have lawyer's lounges. And I would go into the lawyer's lounge where it's air conditioned and then put my tie on. And that particular day, I'm walking into the lawyer's lounge. And as I go to open the door swings open, and standing in front of me is a newly Senate approved United States federal district judge. I'd never met him before. He's a younger guy. He's relatively my age, maybe a few years older than me. And I say young, but it's the 30
It's relative.
year olds would say we're ancient, right? And But he was relatively young. I knew him. I knew of him. I knew where he had been in his career. I knew that he was seeking this appointment. I didn't know if he knew me. And it's funny as I said, "Oh, you're Judge so and so," and he said, "Yeah." And I'm thinking, why is he standing in the lawyer's lounge if he's a federal district judge? Because if for attorneys who practice in the court land, federal judges are kind of like kings of their own little kingdoms. They're hard to get to. Their offices, their actual offices, are like the inner sanctum or the holy of holies. Rarely does an attorney actually get to go into a federal judge's actual office.
Yeah,
They
it's
may go into the
out of
floor.
place, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so, I looked at him, and he said, you're Brian Walker. And I said, I am. He goes, I know who you are. And he said, I know that you've thought about being a judge in the past, and you really need to be a judge. And he said, come in, come in. And I'm thinking, why is he inviting me into the lawyer's lounge? And he said, oh, by the way, this isn't the lawyer's lounge anymore. Right now, it's my temporary office until they figure out where they're going to put me. And in a week, I'd been in a week before. There had been loungy type sofas laying around and stuff. They had moved all that out. He had his desk. It was decorated. It was kind of surreal. You're walking into his office, and he said, sit down. And we just started talking. And then all of a sudden, he said, you know what? He goes, he's talking about how he thought I needed to be a judge. And he said, you know what? He goes, I just thought of this. He said, I was serving on the Second Court of Appeals when I got this appointment. And one of my former colleagues just confided in me recently that she's retiring. He goes, you need to run for her position. And I kind of looked at him in a kind of a weird way. And I didn't realize in that moment that this might be a God thing. So I kind of did, but I didn't fully digest what he was saying because I was actually running late to a hearing in front of another judge in that courthouse. And I said to him, I said, hey, Judge, do you mind if I go to this hearing and I come back by here so we can talk about this afterwards? And he said, yeah, no problem. So I went to court and I'm sitting in the gallery waiting for my case to be called. And then it hit me. I prayed for God to literally walk me into where he wanted me to go about an hour before, 30 minutes before I had this conversation. And then all of a sudden, I walk into this judge's office that used to be the lawyer's lounge, and he's telling me that I need to run for the Court of Appeals. And I just had this feeling that that's exactly what I was supposed to do. And the rest is history. I actually ran against two sitting district judges. I had never been a judge before, and I ended up coming in first place in the primary. Got into a runoff in the middle of COVID with one of those sitting judges, and ended up winning the election with 64% of the vote. So, and have been on the court now. I'm in my fifth year, and so the faith is important, and he's guided me. I was about to say, I did want to say this. More important than me being on the court, not only is my faith, but obviously the fact that I'm a husband, I'm a father. Those are the most important things to me in my life. But it is quite a blessing to be able to serve in the capacity in which I do. And then, of course, another part of what I do too is me and my wife have some real estate interests. A lot of judges do that on the side. And because I don't have much of a social life and I don't have a lot of hobbies, I don't play golf, I don't hunt, I have no problem with people that do. It's just not a thing that I do. Essentially, my hobby and my wife's hobby is enterprise and investment and working. We're
Yeah.
always working.
Before I would want to get into the real estate stuff, but I want to go back
Yeah,
and revisit that because I
sure.
always tell people on my team, I've got a real estate team of 28 agents across Texas, and we have these conversations all the time because I see God working in our team. And
Yeah,
I tell them there is no coincidence.
yeah,
Things happen. And it's a lot of times it's in hindsight. The hindsight for you there was like an hour sitting there in the court hearing, and you're like, okay, God, yeah, that's what that was.
yeah,
Sometimes it takes years, but I think that's an important point to point out is
yeah.
that it wasn't a coincidence that all that happened that day.
No, I agree. I agree with that. And now it's interesting. I would never even say this, but I just preached. I stand in for the pastor and preach occasionally at our church. I preached just this past Sunday, actually not this past, the Sunday before last. And this was a part of the sermon that I preached. It was actually about how God guides us simultaneously to us acting in our free will. And one of the things I mentioned in that, it is that, in all of the scripture, Old Testament and New Testament, there's not a single verse that actually says specifically there are no coincidences. We say that a lot, and I think it is correct, or it can be incorrect depending on what you mean by it. If you mean, I believe, this is just me, but if you mean that everything that happens in this world was endowed by God, I personally don't agree with that because I don't believe that God leads us to sin. James tells us that he never tempts us with sin. I also know that we live in a fallen world. And I know that we all are endowed with free will. And so there are some things that just happen that God didn't necessarily intend to happen. He may have, obviously, he knew they were going to happen, but he didn't necessarily intend for them to happen. But the beautiful thing is, although the scripture doesn't say there's no coincidences, what it does say is in Romans 8:28, it says all things work together for the good of those who love God, and are called according to his purpose. And so it doesn't say some things, it doesn't say most things. It actually says all things work together for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. And so what's beautiful about that is he's not telling us that anybody will necessarily, he can use all things for anyone. He's not saying that he can use all things for someone who's disbelieving, who's not following the Lord. But what he's saying is, if you put God first, then he can use all things, and he will use all things for our good if you are putting God first. And so, when you're putting God first, all these amazing things happen, and they are seemingly not coincidental. They are not coincidental. They were purposeful. God intended it. But he uses it. Now, of course, there's when some people say there are no coincidences, they mean by that when things happen, God planned. When the good stuff happens, God planned for it to
Right. And the
happen.
bad stuff, you didn't. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so it's a complicated subject matter, but I actually got to the point where I don't actually say anymore that there's no coincidences.
Mhm.
Um, I'll just say there's rarely coincidences.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing is too is that all happened bathed in prayer. You said you'd sat there, in that office and said and pointed, I think I'm supposed to be there. God
Yeah,
showed me, reveal it to me. And
amen.
I
Yeah.
think that's pretty powerful too.
Yeah, and that's is it First John 5:14 says, "This is the confidence that we have in approaching Him, obviously Him is God, that if we ask anything according to His will, He hears us, and if we know that He hears us, we have whatever we've asked of Him." And so yeah, you have to see that, and James tells us you have not because you ask not, and so and it's funny. I actually spoke to a real estate group. There's a group of guys called the Real Estate Guys. I think that's what they're called,
Okay,
and
I've heard of them. Yep.
they have like 3 or 4 seminars a year, and I became friends with one of the heads of the group. So he invited me to come and speak about a real estate project we were working on, and I just felt led to actually talk about some of the stuff we're talking about. And one of the things I mentioned in that talk was, uh, you have not because you ask not. So many of us, I said, if you're a believer and you're in this room and you're doing real estate, sometimes the last thing we think about in approaching deals is to ask for God's favor and direction. And yet he's faithful and just. He never leaves us. He never forsakes us. He cares about those things very much. And the beauty of it is when you seed that stuff with prayer, he guides, and and sometimes he keeps us from a really bad deal and he closes the door, and sometimes he opens the door to the really good deal. And if you're putting him first in everything you do in your life, he's going to guide you into the good stuff, because that's the promise that we have in him. And I've seen it throughout my career and throughout my life
Yeah.
firsthand.
And I'd even say he'll allow some of the bad stuff to go through because all the lessons you get and the reliance that you have upon him. Um, you know,
100%. 100%.
yeah,
Yeah.
super powerful. So I was going to ask you a question, but you completely ruined it because I was going to say, well, were you sitting around in Texas State thinking you're going to be a judge for the Texas Second District Court of Appeals? And the answer is no.
No
Um,
way.
yeah,
No way.
but you
Uh,
did have an interesting journey between that time, and you had your private practice, but you were also you were a JAG as well.
I was, yeah. I was in the uh, the Air Force Judge Advocate General's Reserve Corps for 9 years, and so I was stationed at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, um, uh, Aviano Air Base in Italy, which was a really cool experience. And then I had it was unique, and it was just a blessing. It was just one of God's unique things that He does. I don't know how it happened. It just kind of fell out of the sky. Um, I got selected to serve as a drill instructor at Air Force Officer Training School, and I didn't know it when I accepted it, and that I was the first JAG ever to have that happen. And I got to OTS and started going through my training, and the next thing I know, United States Air Force Public Affairs is flying down from DC with news cameras and following me around, and they were telling me, hey, this is a historic first, and so uh, that was a kind of cool experience. And talking about how God guides and uses all things, little old me, I never would have gotten the best assignment in the U.S. Air Force, which is Aviano Air Base. Everybody wants to go to Aviano. It's a small base, but it's in northern Italy. It's an hour north of Venice. It's beautiful. It sits at the foot of the Dolomites, which are the Italian Alps. You literally, it's 3 hours from 2 hours from Slovenia, 3 hours from Austria. It's an amazing place to be assigned. I never would have gotten there on my own because I can assure you I'm not smart enough and savvy enough to make that happen. Um, but whatever, for whatever reason, I got the gig at OTS, and and after I had completed that assignment, it was in the Air Force magazine and the Citizen Airman magazine. And somehow the Judge Advocate General of the United States Air Force, a three-star general who sits in you know, his holy lair at the Pentagon, um, read the article, and he had his, I think, XO call me, and his executive officer that basically is kind of like his attaché, call me and said, I work for the General Byrne at the time, and he found out what you're doing at OTS, and I kind of got scared when I heard that because I
Oh,
didn't know if
you're
I
in
was going to get
trouble.
in trouble because I didn't ask for permission. And sometimes, I didn't call them and say, hey, can I do this? And of course, this was a different command. I'm serving as a JAG over here. And then over here, I'm working for Air Education Training Command. They're the ones who asked me to do the gig, and I did it. And so I kind of held my breath. And then he said, he read the article and he thinks it's so awesome, so cool. He's so proud of you. And I said, really? And he goes, yeah. And he said, so if there's ever a time you want to put in a request to be transferred somewhere, now's the time. He literally said that. And he said, where do you want to go? And I was like, where do I want to go? And he's like, I said, do you mean anywhere? Because the way it worked was I wasn't always serving full time. Uncle Sam would fly me to a place and then I would serve for a month or two or whatever it was. And I said, what about Aviano Air Base? And he was like, I think we can probably hook that up. And so rest is history. I ended up at and it was really cool because I'd be able to travel. I'd fly over to Aviano and spend a month or two serving as an active duty officer in an active duty capacity. And then I get to just travel through Europe on the weekends. And that was a total God thing, total God thing. Had nothing to do with me.
What a beautiful opportunity experience, I'm sure. A lot of great things have happened. What has been your biggest challenge? And then we're going to jump into some of your real estate stuff.
Sure. I don't know I don't know if I could say it's a specific thing that's happened to me. It's probably better to generalize. And that is, when you serve in public office, for example, you're under a lot of scrutiny. You'll have detractors. At times you'll be called to do things that not everybody's going to agree with, but you just have to seek, as a believer, I seek the Lord's guidance and I try to do what's right, what I know is the right thing to do and what's just. And you're not always going to have people see it the same way. And so you will occasionally have people reaching out. You'll have vitriol kind of spewed your way. And some of that is just the natural course of what we do. But then some of it is what you see in Ephesians 6 is what I believe is our battle's not being flesh and bone. When you're doing things that you believe God wants you to do, it's commonplace from my experience that Satan's going to come after you, and he's going to try to keep you from effectuating God's will and expanding the kingdom and doing things that are just and godly. And so you get attacked, and it's easy to forget when you're encountering people who are just kind of hacky and terrible to you, uh, that it may not be them at all. That it might be a product of spiritual warfare, and I have found it helpful in those instances to remind myself immediately, like, this person may not even really understand why they're attacking me the way they are. It may be something deeper and darker that's taking place here. And it's interesting when you kind of acknowledge that and then you kind of pray towards that, uh, how people can change and how you can see things in real time, even sometimes. All of a sudden, that person who's being really tacky will back off. And sometimes I'm not even sure if they even know why. And I know that may sound hokey to a lot of listeners if they're not believers and they haven't experienced any of this firsthand. Because if I had not, I would think that this sounds very hokey. But I'm here to tell you that it's very real. And and I can tell you it's very real because of the experiences that I've had.
Yeah,
It's funny.
100%.
I'll tell you a story that's not totally like this, but it's interesting. And it just popped in my head. So I'm going to say it if you don't mind. When I was still practicing law, I was involved in a very high profile case. And I was on the news a lot in this particular matter. And it was the judge, of course, the trial judge was still kind of, you could tell he was rattled by the attention that it was getting. And he was concerned about how he was conducting the case. And I had a co-counsel who was a former district judge. He'd been a district judge for, I think, 20 years. I was first chair, he was second chair in the case. And the trial judge, our opposing our adversary in the case, they had asked for several continuances. We had not asked for any continuances, which is an extension of the case, just a legal continuance. It means the case is going to get put off. And but on a docket one, we were nearing the end, getting ready for trial, and the judge one docket setting tells us, he says, there will be absolutely no continuances in this matter. Just so y'all know going forward, this thing is going to trial. Don't even ask. If you do, you're going to regret it. And about a week or two later, me and my co-counsel realized there were several things that we needed, that we didn't realize we needed for the trial, which meant we were going to have to ask for a continuance. And it just so happened to coincide with me beginning to prayer journal for the first time in my life and keeping a journal of prayer requests and how God would answer them and things like that. So this is literally the first week of my life that I'm ever prayer journaling. And I wrote in that journal, I was like, I don't know how this would happen, but we need this continuance. And God, the only way we're going to get it is if you literally supernaturally soften the judge's heart and like change his heart. And I felt even kind of crazy asking for it and writing it as I was doing it. And yet, about a week later, we have another docket setting. We go in, we do a few little housekeeping measures in preparation for trial. We go through, the judge has several things that we're addressing in the matter. And then as we start to wrap up, it's time to ask for that continuance. And I look over at my co-counsel, who's a former retired district judge. And I said, we need the continuance. Are you going to ask him? And he looks at me, he goes, no, you need to ask. You're the first chair. And I'm like, thanks, man. And so I kind of gulp and I'm nervous. And I said, Your Honor, uh, uh, I hate to do this, and I know what you said the last time we were here, but we need a continuance. And he goes, okay. He goes, how long do you need? It was so weird. And he
Yeah.
said, I said, we need, and I look at my co-counsel and he's kind of looking, we're just dumbfounded. And he said, 2 months, 3 months? And I said, how about 3 months, Judge? And he's like, sounds good. No problem at all. We'll reset this case for 3 months out and we'll go to trial. You think that you'll be ready then? And we're like, yeah. And they're like, okay, then that's when we'll do it. It was so crazy. And it was
From that
really,
point on, you're always the one to ask for the continuances, I'm guessing.
yeah, and to pray about it, right? I mean, I don't know if I'd ever prayed for a continuance before. And yet, how cool was that? He literally, I mean, the only explanation that I can tell you here is that God changed that guy's heart, that he literally softened his heart, that it was supernatural. Somehow he convinced him, he dealt with him.
What a testimony. All
Yeah.
right, let's dive into kind of my bread and butter is real
Yeah.
estate. And you and your wife have this project you're working on. It's a historical property. What got you started with it, and what are you doing? What are you developing?
So I'm not a prolific real estate investor or anything like that, but I have invested over time throughout my life in real estate. I found it to be sound. I have dirt and real property, I've never lost money on. There's been a couple of times where I broke even, but typically, when I've invested, if you will, in real estate, it's always been a success, and I've had great successes with it. And so, I had sold interestingly enough, I owned a kind of a property, and a rural property. It was a ranch for all intents and purposes. It had 5 ponds on a pretty decent sized property. I sold it 8 years. I had it for 8 years, and I sold it for 3.5 times what I paid for it, and which was a pretty awesome payday for us. And so, candidly, we had some liquid, and I wasn't trying to do a 1031 exchange, but I was thinking, look, I need to probably invest in real estate again. And here in the Metroplex, there's so much development. You know, we're in a great place for residential and commercial real estate investment. As I mentioned earlier, we have 31 million people in Texas. It's growing every day. Just in DFW alone, we have 8.1, 8.2 million people. And you can kind of see the growth trajectory on the map of where the development's going. And there's still a few pockets in the Metroplex where the development hasn't caught up to the growth, but yet it's clear that that's where it's moving. And in northwest Tarrant County, up towards Wise County, is basically the next kind of population expansion that's taking place. And I keep up with, and I always suggest any of your listeners to do the same. We have a local business press journal, business journal. I read that regularly, and to just kind of keep my thumb on the pulse of what's going on. And I knew that this community around Rhome, Texas, Rhome, was expanding significantly. And I'd read that there was a ranch out there that I think is 150,000 acres that was purchased by a developer for development. And I'd read that they were going to build one subdivision with 10,000 houses, and they were considering another six subdivisions, 10,000 houses each. It got my wheel spinning, and I thought, this is going to be a great place for development. And it's always good in the real estate world if everybody wishes they had a crystal ball, but if you can get ahead of that and you can buy while it's still low, and then maybe if you have the ability to sit on things for a little bit, pay the property taxes and the insurances and just keep it up, so that you buy low, and then you have the ability to either develop or flip or whatever it may be high, then that's sound investments and so sound investing. And so I got out there before this development actually broke ground. And I literally, I'll just go ahead and tell you, I told my wife one day, I said, I actually feel like the Lord is guiding me to go to Rome, Texas, and to buy a property. And she said, well, what's in Rome? And I said, I don't know. I've never been there. Just have this feeling. And she thought I was kind of like, okay. But I think she had learned even by then that I'm not crazy. And when I say these things, I'm really being earnest. I'm not just making this up. And I just had this overwhelming feeling, you need to go to Rome and drive around. So in the heat of the summer, a few years ago, this is 3 or 4 years ago, we drove up there, and I drove around this town. It's an old town. It's not in great shape. It's most of it's dilapidated, probably at best. And but I could see that they were already cutting the property lines for all these subdivisions. And they hadn't, I think when we went up there, they hadn't actually built the first house yet. And so we drove around. I did drive just a minute north of town, and they were already breaking ground on another subdivision that was unrelated to that one. And then I started to realize there's actually 3 or 4 subdivisions that are being built right around a town of 1,600 people.
It's about to blow up. Yep.
It's about to blow up. Yeah, 25,000 houses are going to be built in the next 5 years out within a mile of the town of Rome. And with more to come. And mind you, within 10 minutes of that area, there's about, I'm guessing about 80,000 single family new builds that are now existing that have been built in the past 2 or 3 years. And so the whole area is booming, and it's moving that way. And so went up there and was driving around getting disillusioned because I wasn't seeing anything. And then I turned down Old Mill Road. And I said to my wife, I said, I'm sitting there and I'm like, please let there be a really cool old mill down this road. And there was so much overgrowth. Um, you could hardly even see the building back behind all the trees and weeds. And I pulled up and there was this pretty enormous structure there. And I looked up under the envelope and there was this amazing 3-story rock building with 2-foot rock walls that looked like something out of, the Northeast or maybe the hill country of Texas. And I just knew, I was like, I'm supposed to buy this. It wasn't on the market. I had to go to the CAD and track down who owned it, and found out it was in a trust, and I had to track down the trustee. But ultimately ended up buying it for a lot less than what I thought I was going to have to buy it. And so we've been sitting on it for a while with the idea that we're just going to develop it slowly. We just finished the first phase. It was an old grain house that had already been turned into a 2-bedroom, 2-bath house. We renovated it into essentially kind of a meeting space, but really kind of a place where you could have 2 bed and breakfast type units. Eventually, the old mill house, the 3-story rock building, it actually is 4 stories because it has a basement. It's going to be a venue. And so if we have weddings there, the house that's already been renovated will be a place where the bride and the groom can stay. And it's divided down the middle. And being traditional like we are, we can open it up after they get married and they can have the whole place. And we plan on having a restaurant on the property, a coffee shop. We're going to, of course, be landlord in those pieces. I'll have tenant restaurant, tenant coffee shop, and we will probably run the venue ourselves. That would be it. My wife will run the venue. She actually has a degree in hospitality and business degree, and she was a GM at several boutique hotels for about 10 years before we met. So she has experience in this area and doing weddings and things like that at these hotels. And so that's what we intend to do with that property.
The takeaway is real estate's generally a solid investment,
Yeah,
and if you can get in early, that's the best. And to be able to have a vision for something too. And I'm guessing when you saw that, you started kind of envisioning like what could this be?
absolutely. And it's funny because I've had this conversation with several people recently. People are coming out and looking at the first phase now that it's complete. And, you know, I've had 2 guys come to me and they're like, not a lot of people have vision or have the ability to see things that other people can't see. And one guy's like, I have it and I can see exactly what you're planning on doing with the rest of this, and it's going to be amazing. And he's like, and you clearly have vision. And the truth of the matter is one of my gift sets is I'm creative, and God has given me the ability to. I actually decorate and design. My wife doesn't even decorate our. She didn't decorate our house because she's like, you're too good at it. I'm not going to waste my time. And so, most people would be kind of that might be the one thing that a lot of people don't know about me. And and so I enjoy that stuff. I enjoy making things look good and textures, and I love renovation shows, and I watch a lot of HGTV type stuff, and so um, I enjoy that, and it's amazing. Like I can see things that some people can see, but then there's some people like my wife will admit, she's like, I don't see it. I can't. I don't have that gift set. So I trust you. I know that it's going to be great. But I don't see what you see. And she's like, but I know that now that we're done with the first phase, if the rest of it looks as good as this, then it's going to be it's going to be really something special. And so, and it's funny also, the other thing I'll say is you can take an existing property and you can stage it and you can decorate it and you can increase the intrinsic value exponentially. I have, when the ranch that I had, when I bought it, the house there was just kind of hodgepodge, and the interior decorating was just random and weird. There was modern and there was rustic, and it was a mix of. It was just kind of an explosion, and it didn't make any sense. And there was something in me that knew it was like, not only do if I buy this place, but if I turn this ranch house into a really cool looking Texas Western rustic ranch look, and then when it's time to sell it, it's going to sell a lot quicker just because people can't see that, but once they see it and it's done, then they want it. And I've had good experiences with doing things like that. And
You know,
so that was part of the reason we had.
there's a statistic out there that like for one out of every four buyers when they walk into a home, a residential home, they can't picture their stuff in it, or
Definitely,
one out of the four can, but the other
yeah,
three can't. And
I
so
believe
yes, staging matters.
I definitely believe that. And one of the reasons we wanted to get the first phase out there done is because there's several reasons, but one of the most important reasons is it's essentially a proof of concept. My banker, I'm not just filthy rich by any means, so we have to leverage investments. We have to investment dollars and loans to do some of the things. And for the further development that we're going to do, we're going to have at least an omnibus loan for it. And the president of the bank, who's become a friend, uh, reached out to me at the very end of our project. He calls me, and I thought this might not be a good thing. I don't know why is he calling me. And he said, I got the bank inspector's notes back. And he goes, and I've never read this before. And he goes, and so I had to call him. And I said, well, what does it say? He said, this is the most dramatic transformation he has ever seen in 40 years of being in the construction business. And it's one of the coolest houses that he's ever seen. And he said, so can I come out there and see it tomorrow? And I thought, yes. And what was funny is he was beating me to the punch because I was actually going to ask him to do that very thing because I wanted him to see, okay, this is what we can do. I GC'd the project. I actually, one of the beautiful things before my dad was an attorney, before he was a judge, and before he became an attorney, he was in the construction business, and so I grew up the son of a general contractor, and so I learned a lot. My dad taught me so much. In fact, I did a lot of DIY stuff out at that project on the weekends and in the evenings. Um, and so when I wasn't wearing my robe per se, and it was all stuff that my dad had taught me, which is really cool. What a blessing to have a dad instill that kind of stuff in you. And but I wanted the banker to see it and as a proof of concept because I thought, okay, this is going to make me getting that loan if I need to get that omnibus loan later so much easier. And then I also said to him, I said, if we do this, I don't think I'm going to hire a general contractor to do the rest of it. He said, you should not. If you can do this, trust me, I have full faith and confidence that you can pull the rest of it off as well. And so it was essentially that. It was having a staged proof of concept. It wasn't just finished and have all the cool textures. There's a lot of barn wood and corrugated tin on the ceilings and whatnot. And I built a river rock fireplace in one room, and I built a brick fireplace in the other, and I Dutch German smeared it and did all that myself. And it's a cool looking property, I think. Um, and by having him see that, I think he now has full confidence that I can pull off the rest.
Yeah,
So
it's great to have those relationships when
yeah,
they can buy into it as well. You know, I've got a banker that's helped us, and he's always like, "So you ready to buy another one?" Or,
yeah,
I don't even have to ask him. It's like, you ready to go again?
oh
And
yeah, they love you. They
yeah,
love you.
great relationships. They're important. And Brian, I thank you for your time today. And
Yeah,
you've got a really important role here in our great state, and yet that role doesn't define you. And I think the audience heard that today. You're a spiritual person. I know where your faith lies. You shared that with us, and I appreciate that because in the business world, you don't get to hear that a whole lot.
yeah,
And that reliance on God. And I appreciate you incorporating that into our conversation today. In fact, I had no idea when we started where this conversation was going to go, but it went exactly where it needed to.
man. And it's obviously I might have felt a little bit more licensed and a little bit more comfortable sharing those pieces with you because you've been a brother in Christ for over 25 years now. And we met because we were in a Christian fraternity together. And I know your faith and I know that you know mine. And what's cool is I can attest to you, walking this path, as best as you possibly could for all these years. And I think my guess is you can attest to it too, because I'm pretty much the same guy that I was 25 years ago, just fatter and grayer and
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to reverse that. So,
I know, me too. Uh,
now, Brian, if anybody is listening to this today and they want to learn more about you, where would be a good place for them to find that information?
sure. You could always Google me. But I my we have to always keep a campaign website going basically because we're always kind of up. We have 6-year terms, but I'm actually up for reelection right now. And but that's not really the important thing. It's just that we always keep a website up, and it's voteforwalker.com, and it's essentially my judicial campaign site, but it has a lot of biographical information. And the first page is a bulleted list of the things I've done, and then I think there's a bio page that talks in more detail about the things I've done, and so that's a good place for sure.
Well, Brian, again, I appreciate your time today and just for giving us the insight. I know that our audience will be blessed by it. So thank you again.
Absolutely, man. Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate you. God bless you, brother.
All right, till next time, onward and upward.